major sins. But these are the 9 worst ones. In fact, there are so many major sins that some of the scholars have put books of 80, 90, 100, or even more minor sins, major sins. And we find many hadith that will mention, we see many hadith that have words. For example, a hadith that comes to mind, that the Prophet ﷺ one time said 3 times, by Allah, they do not truly believe. And the Sahaba said to him, who? And he said, the one who does not keep his neighbor safe from his harm. And in another hadith with the same wording, he said, the one who goes to sleep on a full stomach while his neighbor is hungry. So he used the words, he's not a true believer. So anytime you hear a hadith, for example, that says he's not a true believer, or he's not one of us, this means it is a major sin. These are the hadith, when you hear these wordings, it doesn't mean they've not one of us. It's not talking about they are not Muslims. It means they do not have what is known as the obligatory iman, which is to have the most perfect faith that one can have. It means that their faith is lacking when the Prophet ﷺ says he is not one of us, or the true believer. And this means that these are also major sins. So major sins are many, but these are the 9 worst major sins. And as we mentioned in, if I recall correctly, in last week's lesson, we mentioned that when it comes to major sins, you need to make a specific tawbah. Since this is talking about major sins, it's important to refresh everyone's memory. So we mentioned last week, based upon a verse of the Quran and based upon a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that, for example, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said, fear Allah wherever you are, and follow up a good deed, follow up a bad deed with a good deed, it will wipe it out. So this is okay for minor sins. And even we have a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that from one prayer to the other prayer, and from one Friday to another Friday, and from one Ramadan is a kafara, is an expiation from between them. So when you pray Fajr and then you pray Dhuhr, any minor sins that you've done in between, inshallah, will be wiped out by that. But when it comes to major sins, they have to have a specific tawbah. And then we go on to the next hadith, which is really a commentary on the verse, the translation of which, lower the wing of humility to them out of mercy, Surah Al-Isra, chapter 24. And Arwa said that this verse, lower the wing of humility to them out of mercy, means do not refuse them anything they love. Do not refuse them anything they love. So maybe if one of us was just to read that without looking into the explanation, they may think, I just have to act humble in front of them. But here it's saying, do not refuse of them anything they love. Anything they love, we have to do it as best as we can. And you may remember that I mentioned, if I can remember correctly, last week as well, an example of how we find people in the past, the Salaf, the righteous predecessors, how they would treat their parents. And we mentioned the story of one of them who his mother asked him to get a glass of water, a glass of milk. And he went away. And when he came back, she'd fallen asleep. And he stayed all night next to her holding this glass of milk. So I think if we all try and imagine, unfortunately, try and imagine ourselves, we definitely know that we're all lacking and we can always do better. So this is the kind of, level that they had when it came to the parents. Most of us would say, and we're not just saying it's a sinful thing to do. Maybe you say the person's fallen asleep, you know that they're not going to wake up. But this is just to emphasize how they would go out of their way to be good and serve their parents. Now we have chapter 6 on repaying parents. And it was narrated by Abu Hurairah that the Prophet ﷺ said, a child cannot repay his father unless he finds him as a slave and then buys him and sets him free. Meaning here, it is as if the slave is non-existent and that by his freedom, he comes into existence, such that the child's action here is as that of his parents through whom he came into existence from non-existence. So this is probably a situation that would not occur, but the emphasis here is showing you that you cannot repay the parents. So if your father was kidnapped, for example, and made a slave, and you found him and you freed him, this is the only way you could repay them. And in reality, this is something that probably would never actually happen. And again, we're going to hear lots of these kind of stories repeating themselves, but we remember when the man who came from Yemen, and some of you weren't here last week as well, so it's good to always remind ourselves of these. the man who came from Yemen to make, it was either Hajj or Umrah, and he carried his mother on his back for the whole process. Even if it was Umrah, that's a very hard task. If it was Hajj, that's another level. But even let's just imagine it was Umrah. He carried his mother on his back for the whole process. And he turned around to Umar and said to him, have I repaid my mother? He said, you haven't even paid her for one of her labor pains. One of those pains she had when she's given birth in labor, him carrying her around for the whole of that process did not even repay her for one of her labor pains. Again, this shows us, this puts it in perspective, that nowadays we have this kind of attitude that many people, we've lost that kind of family cohesion, that kind of respect for the parents. There's a lot of influences from outside where we see crazy things in the movies maybe, but this is reality where, the children are shouting at their parents and they're walking out and they're screaming and, and this is unfortunately happens. So this shows, what a major sin this is, and that you can never repay them. Another hadith under the same chapter, Abu Burda ibn Abu Musa related that Ibn Umar saw what we're talking about right now, saw a Yamani man going around the house making tawaf while carrying his mother on his back and chanting, I am her humble camel. If her riding animal breaks loose, I remain in her service. Then the man asked, Ibn Umar, do you think I have repaid her? He replied, no, not even for a single groan of pain of birth that she suffered. Then Ibn Umar performed tawaf and came to the maqam of Ibrahim and prayed 2 rak'ah. He said, O Ibn Abu Musa, every 2 rak'ah make up for everything that expiates that happened before them. So the commentary here mentions that the pains of childbirth and nursing endured by the mother and the tremendous reward and high rank she earns as a result are highlights in this hadith. Therefore, the parents must be shown kindness and great respect. The tawaf and performance of the 2 units of prayer after it, behind the station of Ibrahim, are 2 major means to seek expiation of sins. So we see here the fact that you cannot pay back your mother, whatever, even for one pain in birth. And then it mentions that making these 2 rak'ah at the maqam of Ibrahim are ways to seek expiation of the sins. Another hadith mentions that Abu Marra, the Mawla means the freed slave, of Aqil ibn Abu Talib, also known as Mawla of Hani bint Abu Talib, said Marwan, the governor of Al-Medina, used to appoint Abu Hurairah as his deputy when Marwan left Medina for Hajj. And he used to live in Dhul Hulayfa, an area called Dhul Hulayfa. His mother was in one house and he was in another. When he wanted to go out, he would stop at the door and say, peace be upon you, mother, and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. She would reply, and peace be upon you, my son, and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. Then he said, may Allah have mercy on you as you raised me when I was a child. And she answered, may Allah have mercy on you as you were dutiful towards me when old. Whenever he wished to enter, he would do something similar. And this actually, apart from the fact that it's just amazing that whenever he would go past her house, he would make a dua for her, she would reply. There is a weak chain in this narration, but we mentioned, these generally, all of them, they have authentic meaning. But that reminds me, we had a particular, and I can't mention the sheikh's name because someone told me in a private, you could say, situation, but one of the kind of major scholars that many people listen to and many people benefit from nowadays, based in Saudi Arabia, he was due to come to Dubai for an event. Everything was planned to some extent. Permissions were taken. He'd given his go-ahead. And then he'd gone to tell his mother, and this sheikh is maybe, I would imagine, anything between 50 and 60 years old, I think. He'd just gone to tell his mother, I'll be traveling maybe in a week or 2 to Dubai. He said, my son, I don't want you to go. He WhatsApped the organizers and said, I can't come. My mother didn't give me permission. He's a grown man. Nowadays, we have many people, who are grown men or even younger than grown men. They will say like, I'm a grown man. I have my thing. They would just not listen to their parents, right? This is a sheikh. He's got a very important event coming up. He's given his word, but his mother said, I don't want you to travel, son. Please don't travel. So he replies to them and said to them, I cannot come. My mother did not give me permission. So this also makes us think like, Wow, are we living up to that kind of standard? And then continuing on, hadith number 13 in this chapter, Abdullah bin Amr said, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and made a pledge to him that he would do hijrah. He had left his parents weeping. And the Prophet ﷺ said, go back to them and make them laugh as you made them weep. And I'm not sure if this will come up, but there is another hadith like this where the man had came to the Prophet ﷺ in one of the campaigns when they were fighting against the Quraysh and said, I've come to fight with you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, did you take permission from your parents? And he said, no. He told him to go back. So we can see there are two great acts of worship here. Migrating to Medina, swearing allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ and migrating to him. But he told the Prophet ﷺ, I left my parents crying. The Prophet ﷺ, go back to your parents and make them laugh. So this is one of the great acts of worship is making hijrah, migrating if you can, migrating from a better place where you can practice your religion better. But the Prophet ﷺ said, go back to your parents. And in that other hadith, it may come up later on, he came to fight, to help the Muslims against the Quraysh. And the Prophet ﷺ, go back to your parents. So this shows us the seriousness. And even one time, even recently, and it was actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, as I mentioned in the first lesson, I attend these same book I've already studied with Sheikh Aziz bin Farhan, who's a very well-known Sheikh. And in one of the questions he mentioned, or he made a commentary on a section we come up to, by the way, that talks about inviting the non-Muslim parents. So this book covers so many topics. And he mentioned that even the person who's become a Muslim, they shouldn't automatically just say, I've become a Muslim, I'm going to migrate to a Muslim country. He said, if they have non-Muslim parents, he said the emphasis is they should be staying with their non-Muslim parents rather than making hijrah. Unless they're in such a situation where their life is in danger, maybe, like they're in a place where, because they found out they became a Muslim, the people are going to maybe even kill them or physically beat them every day. Maybe that's a different scenario. Most people aren't in that situation. The Sheikh said it's better for them than to make hijrah, to stay there and serve their parents and look after them and support them and feed them and provide for them and take care of them. So that's very interesting because a lot of people, when they become Muslim, they automatically want to migrate out and they leave their non-Muslim parents and their non-Muslim family behind. So that's an important aspect to that as well, because this is, talking about hijrah and the fact he told them to, told the man as well to go back. Also, there's another hadith, Abu Marra again. He mentioned that he rode with Abu Hurairah to his land in a valley called Al-Aqiq. When he entered his land, he shouted in his loudest voice, peace be upon you, mother, and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. She replied, and peace be upon you and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. This is similar, but the last hadith, he had a weak chain. We mentioned that Imam Bukhari either puts another hadith after it that will support the one before it, therefore it backs it up, so it's okay to quote, or it will have other hadith generally that are well known that will support it. It just means that somewhere in the chain there was a weakness. So this is very similar. So he was when he entered in, he said into the valley, he shouted, peace be upon you, mother, and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. She replied, and peace be upon you and the mercy of Allah and his blessing. He said, may Allah have mercy on you as you raised me when I was a child. And she replied, my son, may Allah reward you well and be pleased with you as you were dutiful towards me when old. Musa, who was one of the narrators of this hadith, said, the name of Abu Hurairah was Abdullah ibn Amr. And the commentary mentions, for what gladdens parents is the child's dutifulness to them. And Abu Hurairah's mother showed appreciation in the best manner by saying, Jazakallahu khairan, meaning may Allah reward you well. As regards to Abu Hurairah's name, Imam al-Dhahabi said, there is some variance on what his actual name is. However, the most kind of common or stronger is that his name was Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhar, and the kunya was Abu Murrah. Sorry, Abdullah ibn Umar is one of the other ones, but the most correct one is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhar. Abu Murrah was the other individual with him. Continuing, we have chapter 7, disobedience to parents. Abu Bakr said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, shall I tell you which is the worst of the major sins? And he repeated that 3 times. They replied, yes, Messenger of Allah. He said, associating something else with Allah and disobeying the parents. He had been reclining, he'd been sitting back, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sat up and said, beware of lying. And Abu Bakr added, he continued to repeat it until I wished that he would stop. So he kept repeating this over and over again. So we see here that Allah's Messenger would show how crucial any matter was, either by repeating a question regarding the matter or employing emphasis or even changing his posture, all of which he employed in this hadith. He could also mildly touch the companion on the chest or hold his hand and other such means. And this narration shows that some major sins are still worse than some others. And from the worst ones is offending the parents, rebelling against them, and severing relationship with them, which are all contradictory to being dutiful to them. It also indicates that the companion ﷺ had great concerns for the Prophet. And it also shows that we see other hadith as well, where the companions, they would, many of these hadith, they are coming to the Prophet ﷺ and they were asking about, tell us good deeds. Sometimes they would even ask, tell us about the sins, about the punishment. One of the companions, he used to come to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, the companions used to ask the Prophet ﷺ about good deeds and rewards. I would ask him about the bad deeds and the sins because I was afraid that I would fall into them. So this is why why do we learn in Islamic knowledge? Why do we learn about Tawheed and Shirk? Why not just Tawheed? Because if we don't learn the opposite of it, we may also, so we need to know what is the good and what is the bad. If you only know the good, then you can't always recognize the bad. And in another hadith, it mentions Warad, the scribe of Al-Mughira bin Shu'bah, said, Muawiyah wrote to Al-Mughira and asked, write down for me something that you heard the Messenger of Allah ﷺ say. And he said, he dictated to me and I wrote out. I heard him forbid asking too many questions, wasting money, and idle talk. Now, this specific hadith is not mentioning to the parents. So I'm not quite sure why it was put in here, Allahu Alam. But there is something I want to mention here that was taken also from the Shaykh that he mentioned here. Too many questions. What does it mean here by asking too many questions? That can be asking too many questions generally, asking unnecessary questions. There was a man who came to the Prophet ﷺ when he told them that Hajj has become obligatory. And he kept asking questions. How many times? Is it every year? And the Prophet ﷺ disapproved of this and said to him, he emphasized to him how you should not ask too many questions, like as if you're trying to put a burden upon yourself. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if I had have said yes, it would have been obligatory for every year for Hajj. So he's emphasizing is sometimes things are clear. You don't need to keep going on how and why and how and like children do when they're young. You tell them why, they give them the answer, but why, and it goes on forever, right? So this is one thing. Also, not asking about things that didn't even happen yet. You see some people, they kind of try to delve into the future too much, ask too many questions about the unseen, and these kind of things. And these kind of things. And it says here, wasting money. And that's even 1 dirham. To waste 1 dirham, even to waste 1 dirham is forbidden. And it mentions idle talk. And the idle talk is, in Arabic it says, وَعَنْ قِيلُ وَقَالُ. قِيلُ وَقَالُ it's literally like gossiping. Idle. So they translate it here as idle talk. And in English, idle talk is a bit vast. But to be more specific, it means like gossiping, carrying stories. And now we're in a time of, unfortunately, of this, we are now in a time of social media. So everyone, we see some disaster happens, someone uploads a video, everyone shares it. And this video is nothing to do with the disaster. It's a video from 5 years ago, or they hear some rumor that there's going to be, I don't know, it could be, sometimes we see it here. They talk about this day is going to be a holiday, or, there's going to be an announcement soon, and everyone starts sharing it everywhere on YouTube, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, everywhere, and then we find out this is just a gossip or a rumor. So this is also something that the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said to avoid idle talk, gossiping, carrying stories, etc. We will finish after this chapter 8. Allah curses whoever curses his parents. Abu Tufail, and an interesting point here, again, it was taken from the Sheikh's lesson, is that it's not mentioned in the book here, but the Shaykh added, Abu Tufayl, his name was Amr ibn Wahab, and he was the last of the Sahaba to die. So the very last Sahaba alive was Amr ibn Wahab, known as Abu Tufayl. Abu Tufayl. Abu Tufayl said, Ali was asked, did the Prophet ﷺ grant you something special which he did not grant to anyone else? He replied, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ did not give us anything special which he did not give to the people, except for what I have written in my scabbard, or my, like a booklet. Then he brought out a booklet on which was written, Allah curses whoever sacrifices an animal to other than Allah. Allah curses whoever steals a landmark. And Allah curses whoever curses his parents. And Allah curses who gives shelter to what the word is in Arabic, which we'll explain, is a muhdith or a muhdith. So I'll read the commentary they've written here, and then I'll explain some benefits that I took from the Shaykh. So Abdullah ibn Saba and his group, they maliciously spread falsehood that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ had granted some special things to Ali, which he did not grant to the rest of the companions, from which is the right to assume the leadership of the Muslims after the Messenger's death. So the background behind this is this Abdullah ibn Saba, he was a man who happened to be a Jew, and some of the scholars, they doubt that he even was any time a genuine Muslim. He started off this kind of fitna that it shouldn't be Abu Bakr, it should be Ali. This is how it started. So people came to Ali and said, did the Prophet ﷺ give you any special instructions that he didn't give to everyone else? Because they'd heard these horrible false tales going around. And Ali then basically clarified to him, and he said, no. But then he mentioned he has a few things he'd noted down one time, which was this, which we find in many other hadith as well. And this booklet was for the documentation of hadith that took place during the lifetime of Allah's Messenger. Like we said, there were many other hadith written by companions that mentioned this as well. So it wasn't something like that, just something that he had kept himself with him. And the word muhdith here is reported, so it means anyone who is like an offender, or anyone who gives shelter to an offender, or supports innovation. And again, obviously this hadith, which is the reason it's mentioned here, again, it emphasizes on cursing against one's parents. Now, some benefits I took from the Shaykh here. It mentions here, Allah curses whoever steals a landmark. And that means you have people, it could mean people are taking other people's land, stealing it, taking it by force. Also, it can mean people who come along and they remove a sign from the road just to be mischievous, to make people get lost. People like this are cursed. So you see sometimes people, unfortunately, they maybe destroy a sign for fun, and that makes people get lost. And that can cause people, they can get lost, they can become in trouble, and many other things. So this is, why our curse is such a... Now it says here, and it's not mentioned in the book, which I'm surprised, because it's not mentioned in this compilation, the English book. It mentions here, Allah curses whoever curses his parents. So some of the Sahaba, they came and they said to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, I mean, nowadays, unfortunately, maybe we find these people, but even back to them, even though they came from a society of non-Muslims, mushrikeen, they found it very strange. Ya Rasulullah, does anybody curse their parents? Because back then they didn't do that. Unfortunately, like I said, nowadays, Allah musta'an, many people curse their parents, unfortunately. But back then, this was something that was disgraceful. So even the Sahaba said, they asked him in another hadith, who curses, just one of us curse our parents? And he replied and said, they curse he said, it is when a man curses somebody else's parents, and we see that sometimes the person would say, may your mother be cursed. And that person says back, may your mother be cursed. So indirectly, you have cursed your parents, because if you didn't curse that person's parents, he wouldn't have cursed your parents. So that is another explanation to this part. But nowadays, unfortunately, there are many people, who may unfortunately get angry, especially as we're growing up as children, as teenagers, or whatever. Maybe unfortunately even some adults, and they don't like something. They may not curse them, but they may go to their room, or they may go in their mind even and curse them. So that's it for today, inshallah. We'll check if there's any questions, because we've reached just over 35 minutes, inshallah. Someone is saying, how do we differentiate between ghiba, backbiting, sharing incidents, and warning about a bad person? Ghiba is defined as Ghiba is defined as speaking about somebody behind their back, and they would not like you to do so. And it has to be the truth. If it's not the truth, then you've slandered them, which is known as buhtan in Arabic. So it has to be the truth. So it's not someone saying like, have you seen such and such? Oh, he's like this, or like instead of going to him and saying to him like just gossiping all this, he looks a bit overweight or he smells a bit, or whatever it may be, and you're actually telling the truth. Some people say, but I'm telling the truth. Okay, that's literally what backbiting is. Backbiting is talking about your brother behind his back in that which he would dislike. Now there are some situations where, like you mentioned, if you're warning against somebody, if you're a person who's able to warn against somebody, you have the ability, or you've heard a particular scholar justly mention certain clear mistakes of a person, and you want to pass that on, that is not backbiting. That is something that in reality has to be done and is rewarded. Because if it's somebody who's spreading misconceptions, false information about Islam, everyone in their own ability, even if that's passing on what another scholar has said about that person, you have to do that. That's not backbiting. And then sharing, when you're sharing incidents, generally speaking, sharing incidents, if it's no benefit, like you may be in a work environment and you have to share an incident that happened of a particular staff member to some other particular staff who are related to the situation. But if you see a staff member make a mistake and you spread it around the whole of the office, it's backbiting. But if you go to the people who are in charge of that person and they're involved in this work process, and you have to tell them because it's affecting the work, this is not backbiting. This is for the benefit of the work, to try and come to some solution. But to go and spread it around everybody in the office that this person did this or this person, that would be backbiting, because these other people, they have no control, they have no disciplinary, they have no authority over that person. So they are just basically backbiting in that sense. Trying to get back to the question. Someone's asking, should repentance for the major sin be made by praying the prayer for forgiveness, or by simply seeking forgiveness by asking Allah for forgiveness? When it comes to this, you can, if you make like 2 rak'ah, you make wudu, make 2 rak'ah, and you make tawbah like this. This is like the better way to do it. But if someone were just to ask Allah for forgiveness, this also is enough. But just like in anything, the better you do something, the better it is. But just to seek forgiveness is enough. And an important thing I mentioned, I remember one time, a person, he came to Sheikh Fawzan. You can find this on YouTube as well. And he said to the Sheikh Fawzan, I keep making a mistake. I keep sinning. And then I feel true regret. As we know, for forgiveness, for tawbah, what is it? It is regretting the sin that you did, having true intention that you never want to do it again, and then leaving the sin. You may fall into it later, but you never have that intention like, I'll make tawbah and I'll do it next week. You truly say to yourself, I'm not going to do this. I feel bad. I feel regretful. I'm not going to fall back into this sin. So he went to the Sheikh and he said, he went to the Sheikh and he said, I make 2 rak'ah, like you mentioned, and I ask for tawbah, and then I keep falling back into it, and then I do it again, and I fall back into it. And the Sheikh said, this is literally tawbah. That tawbah is not, always that you'll never sin, but it's having that every time you sin, you have that true regret and you have that true intention. You feel like, you never want to go back to this sin. So if you do the 2 rak'ah, this is like better. But if you can also just do it at any time, in your salah, in your car, whatever it may be. If someone curses their parents and then makes sincere tawbah, would Allah still curse that person in this life? Can the person repay by being good to the parent and make them happy? Allah says that He forgives all sins except except that you create or you associate others in worship partners with Him. So yes, inshallah, but this is a very slippery, they say very slippery slope to curse parents and these kind of things. So definitely you need to make some sincere tawbah, and definitely you need to try and do even extra good to them. I mean, you have to be good to them anyway, right? And make them happy. That's not repaying, that's not making up for your cursing them. That's your job every single day to do that anyway. That's obligatory for everybody. but maybe try and go extra out of the way, to to do more than normal to them to make up for it. Someone say, can you backbite an entity? Again, I mean, it may not be backbiting, but then you fall into the other problem now. Okay, if you start talking about associations, and even more so government, and you start criticizing when you're not a person who has probably even the understanding of how those kind of things work, that can lead to it can lead to enmity, it can lead to those kind of people then who start to go down that slippery slope of being anti-governmental, talking about the governments and all that stuff, which is not the correct way and not from the way of Ahl Sunnah. So there's no real benefit in person. He hears about a new rule or the car fines have gone up, so he starts complaining and talking about it. There's no real benefit in doing that because it changes nothing. And all these things usually are put there for, a valid reason. Now someone said, hey, I request you to give a piece of advice to the Talib al-Ilm. I don't know if I'm the right person who should be giving such advice. I need the advice myself, but advice is to seek knowledge. And the fact that there are many hadiths that mention that it's enough that there is a hadith that mentions those people who sit in the circles of knowledge, that they will never be at loss. And this is like on the Day of Judgment, there will be people who, because they used to attend lectures, they didn't necessarily, maybe they weren't that studious, they didn't maybe make lots of notes, and they weren't ready, but they just used to attend these circles of knowledge, lessons, because they knew there was some good there. So they're kind of those people you see sitting around, paying attention, but they never have a book maybe with them, they're not making notes, but you see them there. They're trying to take part of it, but they're maybe not that serious in studying. The Yawm al-Qiyamah, those people, there'll be some people like that who maybe were destined for the fire, who won't go. Why? Because of this statement that they are the people who they're sitting in these gatherings, they will never be at loss. They will never be lost. So that's enough just to for people to come. And there's so many hadith. We know the scholars say that seeking knowledge. There's some opinions that if you wake up at Qiyam al-Layl, some scholars even have the opinion. You wake up, instead of doing Qiyam al-Layl, seek knowledge. Some of them felt that it's better to read a chapter of knowledge than to stand in prayer. And that may not be the general idea of Qiyam al-Layl is standing, but Qiyam al-Layl can be many other things. Even recently, Sheikh Aziz was asked about if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're kind of lazy to get up and pray Qiyam al-Layl, but you woke up, you're awake, and you ask Allah for forgiveness, you make some dhikr, you make some istighfar, you go back to sleep. Sheikh said, this is Qiyam al-Layl. Qiyam al-Layl means to wake up. Qiyam al-Layl is not just to pray, it's to read Quran, it's to seek knowledge, it's to make istighfar. So there's so many hadith that mention which I'm sure all of you know, too many to mention here, of the great reward of seeking knowledge. And also to continue. Sometimes you get lazy, sometimes you might be on Zoom, you get lazy to tune back in. Something else comes up. I'm talking to myself, for all of us. So it's important to do it consistently. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that Allah loves the deeds which are consistent, even if they are small. Maybe we'll just give a couple more questions. Someone's asking, and maybe I don't know if you were in the class at that point. Someone said, how could we repay our parents back? We mentioned that you can never, in reality, repay the parents back. All you can do is do your best, very best to serve them. Yes, definitely. Someone's asking, is sharing what happened in our day with our friends, like we're sad because of our parents, such and such, is it also backbiting? Yes, it's also backbiting. It's not just backbiting, it is being disrespectful to the parents. Like at the end of the day, your friends, at the end of the day, I'm assuming generally you sound young. So your friends, they're not some wise person. They're not like a scholar or someone who's been through lots in life. So you go to maybe to an imam or a scholar that you trust and you say, I'm having these problems with my parents. What do you advise? For example, that's a bit different. But to go to your friends and just complain and because you want to get it off your chest because you feel sad, in reality, most likely your friends are not going to be full of wisdom and provide you with great solutions. They're probably going to say, yeah, you know what, my dad and my mum is like this. So there's no real benefit in doing that. And by telling these other children or teenagers about your parents, you're disrespecting your parents. So it's not just backbiting; it's disrespecting the parents. So you should avoid doing that. And even someone recently, again in the same lessons, asked Sheikh Aziz, and they said to him, when my parents admonish me, I answer back, and I also feel upset that they admonish me. So the Sheikh said, first of all, there should be no such thing as answering back. You should not. He said, for you to answer them back is unacceptable. Said, even if they're wrong. I mean, it's not like they're going to they're murdering you or something. Like they may accuse you of something, and you may see they're angry. It's better for you to just take it there and then. When a day or two later, when they've calmed down, you go back to them and say, Father, everything's back to normal. I just want to let you know, wallahi, I didn't do such and such and such. And I'm not doing it to debate with you and try and prove you wrong. I just didn't want you to think that I did that when I didn't do it. For example, that could be a way to do it. But the Sheikh said, feeling sad is, you can't control that emotion. If they shout at you, even if you're wrong and they shout at you, you're going to feel bad. You can't control that. Feel bad, you get over it. But to, like we mentioned before, to feel bad and then go in private and insult them or have these insulting thoughts without saying A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem or go into your room or whatever it may be, this is the problem. Someone said they benefited a lot from the lesson, but they missed the previous lesson. It will be, inshallah, uploaded on the Islamic Information Center channel. This one I should be streaming live, so it should already be there. Last week's one should be uploading today, I believe. They had to make some adjustments to it. I think we'll probably have to. Okay, some of these questions not quite sure, but one of them saying in some works. Hang on, I can't. Someone saying she basically was saying if I do think for my mother, but my mother thinks I haven't done it to the level of work that she expects from me. What should you do? Just keep trying your best. Maybe some parents, they may just be, very perfectionist. We just just continue doing it. I mean, as long as there's nothing there that's really causing you any major problems. I have to make up some fast, but my parents will not allow me to fast for some days. But fasting helps me to remain consistent in good deeds. Do I obey them? If you have to make up fasts, which are wajib, then in this case, you wouldn't obey them. Because we mentioned the last lesson that the principle is that there is that there is no obedience, there's no disobedience to the Creator. There is no obedience to the creation if it's disobedience to the Creator. So you have to make up fasts. If it's voluntary fasts, then maybe we can say, maybe they have a reason, maybe they're worried about your health, maybe they're worried about your focus at school, voluntary fast. But if you have fast, you have to make up for them. So I would say, try and explain to them, otherwise just fast. Just try and fast. I mean, you might say, how can I? I mean, maybe you're at school or something, they're not going to see you for most of the day. You could come home and you could say, maybe you could fast once a week. So then you say to them, oh, I'm not feeling hungry. I had a big lunch, or I'm still full up from lunch. Something like this. So they won't notice it. If you have, it depends how much you have to fast. If you have a few days, you could spread them out once a month or once a week or twice a month until you've made up the days before the next Ramadan comes. My parents are no more. How can I be sadaqah jariyah? The first thing, we mentioned this in the last lesson, the first thing that you can do for your parents are make dua for them. This is the best and most important thing you do for your parents after they pass away, is make dua for them. Ask Allah to forgive them. And then you can do things like give charity on their behalf. Those are the things. Those are the things that you can do for them. The most important thing is dua and istighfar. And some of the scholars, they mentioned that if someone makes dua for their parents 5 times a day, that they have done their duty to their parents. It doesn't mean literally someone said, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do nothing else, but it's to emphasize that you've done, if you're making sincere for the dua for your parents 5 times a day, and that's even when they're alive. So even more so when they're dead. Yes, you brothers have another class, you can go, inshallah. Just going to try and finish here. Someone's saying that if they want to make hijrah from an atheist country because of saving children from LBQT, but your parents want you to stay, then should one stay? I mean, individual cases, that's a bit different. It all depends on the country, the threat of LGBT. Some places you can go and you can home tutor, so you can avoid that issue of the pressure from schools that are pushing that. That all depends. I can't really. That probably would be on an individual case. Would probably need to be taken up to someone of a scholarly level to answer that, depending on the details. I think we pretty much answered most of the questions now. Are there specific sins for punishment in the grave, or all sins can cause? That's a very big topic, but there are certain sins that, the Prophet ﷺ saw people being punished in the grave. When he was taken to Isra and Mi'raj, he saw people who were fornicators being punished. He saw people who used to sleep and miss the prayers being punished. He saw various kinds. So there are specific sins, but generally people, people generally will be punished in the grave. There are specific sins. Maybe we can try and look for some more information in there, inshallah, if I remember, to get more specific, to elaborate on that topic. But it's quite a vast topic. But there are specific sins. What I'd recommend is, let me see if I can find a good book as well that would be a good reference point for that. So you can refer to that. There was one book called Punishment in the Grave. You probably find it in English. It was written by Sheikh Hussein Al-Awaisha. I think it's spelled as Awayshaah. Sheikh Hussein Al-Awaisha, one of the students of Sheikh Al-Albani. He has a book about the punishment of the grave. I think that may have more details in there. And it also talks about the evidence of the punishment of the grave. It's a nice book. That's it, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. And inshallah, till next week, anything which I've said which is correct is from Allah, and anything I've said which is a mistake is from myself and from the shaitan. And inshallah, till next week, آخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.